Today, we're celebrating 100 episodes. We have a special guest in store for you and a surprise giveaway at the end. Stay tuned for the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to episode 100 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. Party horn noise, party popper.
Insert your own sound effects wherever you may be.
Insert your sound effects. Here we are really excited to have been going at this for 100 episodes, and really thank you, the listener, for staying tuned in from week to week. We have two fun things to celebrate this week's episode. One, as you already teased for us, AJ, we have a special guest, which we'll introduce here in just a moment. We also have a surprise giveaway, but we're going to be talking about that at the very end of the podcast. So stay tuned to the very end to get the details on what it is that we're giving away and how you can enter easily into that giveaway. But today, for our special guest interview, we spoke with Dr. Aubrey Malphurs, who is the founder of our group, the Malphurs Group. And for those of you who are listening, a lot of you have come to the podcast just the good old-fashioned way via Google or searching on your podcast app or on Spotify or something like that. So you may not even know who Aubrey is. Others of you may have had Aubrey when he was your professor in seminary, or he may have been something like a mentor to you through his books and his writings. But we're honored to have had Aubrey on, Dr. Aubrey Malphurs on as our guest today. AJ, what did we talk to Aubrey about, and why should anyone care about it?
Yeah, so we talked with Aubrey today about 5 competencies of high-impact leaders. And the reason we did that, several reasons. I mean, we love him to begin with, and we're certainly thankful to have him as the leader of our team. But Aubrey has spent the last 41 years teaching in Bible colleges and seminaries. Most of the last half of his career spent as a senior professor at Dallas Theological Seminary. So he's got over 20 books to his credit, over 250,000 in print. And so he just really is a wealth of information. He's written a lot of leadership books. And so this is a great topic for him. And it's an important one for the church. And it's one that's really sought after in the church as well. So we always try to bring content that will be useful. So we had a great conversation with him today. He has retired from Dallas Seminary now, just prior to COVID. And we've been waiting for a great opportunity to just talk about that, celebrate his legacy and body of work. And so this was a great opportunity for us to talk about what he has brought to the church over 4 decades and celebrate our 100th episode. So
that's right.
I'll tell you what,
we can't wait for you guys to just get a glimpse of the expertise and wisdom that he has to share. And let's dive into this interview.
Let's go. Well, it is great to be here with Aubrey Malphurs today. A rare treat for us on the show to have you on, Aubrey. And I think we're going to have a fun discussion today, talking through 5 competencies that a good leader should have. And this is stuff that you know well since you wrote the book. So I'm looking forward to talking about it with you today.
This is certainly an important topic, and especially when we look at what's going on in our country, our past president, our new president, Biden, and what these people are talking about in the midst of a pandemic. This is a vital area for all people who are involved in any kind of position, direction, leadership. That's important. And much of what we talk about will apply to the church, but also it can go outside the church. And as AJ has already said, we're talking about leadership competency. And what I want to do this morning is talk about 5 competencies that will make a difference in developing leaders and developing ourselves as leaders.
Before we hop into those, Aubrey, I want to just say one of the things I've noticed, you mentioned this, just coming out of the pandemic. This is anecdotal, but we've done more as the Malphurs Group, more work with churches in this leadership development and leadership pipeline design work than we've ever done
Mhm.
in previous years. And the demand for this is really high. And I think you're exactly right that one of the things that churches have begun to notice coming out of the pandemic, because it was a bit of a crucible moment, I think, for the church, as it was for a lot of the world, just this need to be better at developing ourselves as leaders and to be better at developing the next generation of leaders. And so I'm really glad that you've done so much work in this, and we've been able to really stand on your shoulders in a sense, in the work that you've done, and as we've continued to develop these themes and working with churches. So thanks so much for the work you've done on this, and also I can't wait for you to share some insight on these 5 areas.
Yeah, and you already mentioned it being applicable in the church and outside the church. And of course, what we should be doing as church leaders is influencing the world around us. And so if we can model good leadership development in the church, people will take those skills then back into their workplace and their sports teams and everything else that they're involved with, and hopefully have the influence that that Jesus would like us to have everywhere.
And we've done so little work in some of these areas that people are totally lost. And we've got to come up with a plan. We've got to come up with some information that will help people work through all this, or else they're not sure what we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's
Now,
jump into your first point here on
yeah.
on character development being the first of the 5 competencies.
Well, what can you say about character? I mean, that's really with the emphasis on Scripture, on who we are and becoming better, growing closer to God, growing closer to family and others. We can see how important that is, the character competence. So what is your character? Who will you need to be to lead well in your particular organization? You need to ask that question. Who do I need to be? How about a pastor, a president of a parachurch ministry, or one of these things? Who do you need to be? That's a critical question. And we're after character. We're after character here. What is your character? How are you doing in this particular area?
In our leadership pipeline design work that we do with churches, one of the exercises that we do is, and I think this is something you've done with churches as well, is examine multiple definitions of leadership.
Yeah.
And I think there's 8 that we provide. One of them is from you. And I don't believe that all of those definitions necessarily come from Christian writers or Christian authors. Some of them come from a more business sphere. And what's interesting is the couple of Christian examples of definitions of leadership include a reference to the leader's character, and the ones that are not Christian definitions of leadership don't include a discussion about their character. And I believe that this is, when I'm working with churches, I often will emphasize this is one of the key differences, or should be one of the key differences, between leadership in the church and leadership in other places. Not that character doesn't matter other places, but we should be out in front leading on character. And I don't know that that's always the case in the church. I think we've seen lots of instances of high capacity leaders who have very poor character in the church. And that's obviously tragic.
Yeah, those are the ones that make the news, right?
Yeah, those are the ones I was just thinking about as you were talking about it there. And all of a sudden people are starting to say, hey, that is important, isn't it? And our point here is, how are we doing in that area? How about
it certainly seemed to be a high focus for Jesus, in that upper room moment, right? And he's saying, if you want to be a leader, here's what it looks like, and using the towel as a metaphor, not just for certain actions we should take, but really to exemplify what all of leadership ought to look like.
Yeah. Well, and that's the upper room discourse. And that's pretty important in what is being emphasized there. So again, I think that for our listeners, they need to ask that important question. And we need to ask that about each one of these competencies. But the first one is my character. How am I doing in that area?
Yeah.
I can sit here and criticize past presence, future presence, current present. But if I'm not doing any better, then who am I to be critical of that? So at some point, we need to sit down with someone who knows us well, maybe family, maybe wife, husband, whatever, and talk about, how is my character? What is our definition of character? And how am I doing? Right? Somebody needs to give us good, honest feedback.
Yeah, well said. Okay, let's move on to the next one, the second area here.
Yeah, that would be the knowledge development. And here we ask the question, what do you need to know to lead? What do leaders need to know in order to lead their followers well? And where are you strong? Where are you weak? Uh, what do you need to work on at this particular point in your life? What knowledge do you not have that you need to have? And again, this is one of those things where we can get the help of others.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to ask the question in our work or in our ministry, what is it that we need to know? In other words, to do it well and to do it in a way that honors God. So that would be the knowledge.
Yeah, that's certainly easier to work on than character.
Yeah.
we can gain solid knowledge easier than we can gain solid character.
Yeah.
And there's so many resources now online, of course, in our seminaries and our colleges, and in books written by people who have been writing books for decades. So
who might that be?
we'll talk more about that later. So yeah, knowledge development, but it could still be something overlooked. The old thing is, you don't know what you don't know. And so having people around us that can help build us up in areas, but also maybe, be able to make these suggestions or recommendations on gaining some knowledge in a particular area is helpful. And a leader should be open to hearing that and making steps towards it.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that's a really big aspect of this is the desire to know.
Mm-hmm.
It really starts with a desire to learn and a desire to know and to gain knowledge and understanding and wisdom. A lot of guys who are in ministry, especially the longer they've been in it, it gets easier just to kind of rest on what you already know versus being open to learning new things. And going back to the pandemic, I mean, how many pastors out there didn't know anything about live streaming or certain online tools or social media because they haven't avoided it. And then they were sort of thrust into having to learn it and organizations having to learn it. And I don't know what you think about this, Aubrey, but just that it really starting with a desire to keep learning, even though we get older and we maybe stop wanting to learn as many things, but being a leader is being a learner.
Mm.
Yeah, I would use the term here, a thirst for knowledge.
Yeah.
A thirst for knowledge. And I think that obviously this ties into scripture. We need to know the scriptures, the Bible. That's a big part of what church is all about.
Mm.
Sometimes we overemphasize, I think, the knowledge side of it, and we miss some important points. But nonetheless, what do we not know that we need to know? And how can we find that out? Again, are there people within our range of ministry or within our groups that are willing to come up and say, hey, we're not very strong in this area. What do we need to know here? Where can we get this information? And so I think this needs to be asked at all the different levels in the church.
Yeah, really well said. And this goes back to a little bit to measurement. I think that sometimes churches don't want to measure progress in certain areas because ignorance is bliss a little bit. But if we start to measure certain things, then we start to have knowledge about what's really happening. And then once we have that knowledge, it kind of forces us to do something about it. It's like when we work with churches to do the church ministry analysis that you developed so long ago and that we've continued to iterate on. Once churches have the knowledge of their current health, they have to do something with that. They either have to willingly say, we don't care and we're going to do nothing, or they have to make a choice to change and grow. And so that knowledge really is powerful, but it starts with wanting to know.
Hopefully they'll want to change and know.
Mm-hmm.
And who stands the watch, who stands on guard in terms of that.
Mm.
And this is something that pastors don't always do very well, and they need some help in this area. Having been in the seminary and having taught men who are going to be pastors, we really realize, at least I do, that we're missing in some of these areas. It's important for us to know, and we can't put that aside, but are we able to pick out that which is important for us to know, that which we really need to know, and who's going to point that out to us, and how open are we going to be to that kind of thing? sometimes that, we try to save face, and it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on to number 3.
Number 3 are on skills development.
Yeah.
So, in sort of, this can bleed over to the previous point on knowledge development, but let's talk about skills.
Yeah. Well, again, I think we're asking the question in terms of your position of leadership. What skills do you need to know to do a good job, do a job that honors the Lord? And again, we may not have all the information that we need here. So again, we need that such situation in our church where we can ask what are the skills that we need in terms of doing our area of ministry well, in terms of leading people and being led as well. Not only leading, but being led. So I think we need to keep that in mind.
As it relates to senior pastors, what kinds of skills do you feel like are often missing that they need? I know that every church is different, every pastor is different, but just as a general case, what kinds of skills do you see often lacking in senior pastors?
Well, probably the next one, which is emotional development. This is something I think that mixed in manhood, it mixes in here a little bit as well too. But emotional development, being open with your emotions, being willing to show and share your feelings with people under whom you have influence, or over whom, or around whom you have influence. And I think that's one of the difficult things.
Yeah, no doubt. I think before we get too deep into emotions, one of the things that definitely, and I've heard you say this many times in your work at Dallas Seminary, you were always stressing leadership development. Now we're getting, into some aspects of that in this whole discussion today, but that has been a huge missing component in training up pastors to be able to lead the church organization well. Yeah. In addition to obviously needing to know God's word. So, that's a huge thing. And I think you've really made changes in not only at Dallas Seminary, but in other teaching institutions all around the country and even around the world by, decades of pushing that. Yeah. I think we've seen really a shift in that. Don't you think, Scott, that's being included in a lot of spaces now to help train up pastors to lead people and to lead organizations and not just preach?
Yeah. So Aubrey touched on this, but most pastors are sort of taught things about the Bible or how to write a sermon or those kinds of things, but they're often not content, but they're not really taught leadership skills. I would say another big aspect, the ability to manage a project or just simple management type things, which we don't think about it, but think about how many tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars filter through even a smaller church, and yet a lot of these folks who are placed in positions of influence have very little skills and understanding on how to develop a budget for an organization that's bringing in $500,000 every year, how to manage a team of people, these are all skills that can be developed and can be learned, and I would contend should be learned, particularly by folks who serve as staff and board members of churches.
Yeah, very important skills.
And we've got people like that in our churches who can train people in those skills. And I wonder if we're taking advantage of that. We have these resources, and every church has them. I don't care how small you get. Every church has them. So I would challenge our listeners. What about your church? Where is it strong? What are its, in terms of skills development? Where are you weak? Where are you strong? We keep getting back to those. And I think we have to ask those questions. Am I weak here? I may think I'm weak, and somebody else may say, that's just not the case. I think for us men, that's often true with our wives. We think we know something and they inform us that you really don't know what you're talking
about. Have you been listening to my conversations, Aubrey?
I've been listening in. I've planted a mic in each one of your houses. That's my next book will be.
Things overheard in the Ball and Matthew households. Yes. We'll make sure that we stifle that one before release. So let's get back to your fourth point that you already started to get into, and that's emotional development.
Yes.
And you wrote a book on this topic too, developing emotionally mature leaders in the church.
And there's so very little out there on it. I was amazed when I started working on that. And I think a big part of that, here's a little honest confession here, is I've not really been in touch with my emotions. I'm not strong in that area. And so I'm trying to be more open, especially with kids, my kids. But, where are we emotionally? My friends, I've got several men in my life who are my friends, and we're able to share at an emotional level. And it's important they grant me that freedom to do that. And I want to grant them the freedom to do that as well. So again, there's a temptation on the part of men to look at emotions as weakness, as signs of weakness. And we've got to get away. We've got to address those areas. And I'm still, even after having written a book on it, I'm still finding that it's not strong in many churches. And that's a disappointment.
Yeah, I'm certainly with you in not being strong in the emotional area. It just doesn't come naturally to all people. And my wife was excited that I read your book. I think she's still waiting for the results of my transformation, but maybe someday there's hope. There's hope for all of us.
Just one tear. That's all.
Yeah, that's so funny. I will say this. I was just at a church this past weekend, on working on leadership pipeline, and one of the things we work on is developing these core competencies for leadership, Aubrey. And we're brainstorming competencies, and I bring up the idea of emotional intelligence or EQ, and a large number of the people in the room didn't know what that even meant, or that was not a term that they were familiar with. What's interesting is there was a bit of a generational gap too on that. Like some of the younger leaders in the room were aware of what emotional intelligence is and some of the stuff behind EQ, and some of the older leaders, it wasn't exclusively that way, but it did seem to break down a little bit that way. So maybe this is something that's just not been talked about in churches for a long time. And so there's almost a bit of a knowledge gap even about the topic.
Has it ever been talked about though? I don't see a time, and maybe there is such a thing as a time in our lives and our ministries where we do talk about these things and deal with them. And I don't know that we do.
I think that probably there's a perception, and I don't want to make assumptions, but there may be a perception even that talking about emotional intelligence or talking about these issues is seen as soft. Yeah, the church is just going soft,
weak,
and that's not true. Yeah,
soft or weak, either term would work. I think. Yeah, you're a weak person, and well, no, I'm just doing what God has allowed me to do in my emotional side of my being, who I am.
Yeah. Well, it's
important. When you talk about this in the book too, that God is an emotional God. He's not stoic. He's not without reaction to us, and and so being emotional or recognizing our emotions is not by any means unholy or carnal. It's a reflection of the image of God in us. Now, how we control and manage our emotions is something different, but the fact that we have emotions and ought to leverage them in certain ways and manage them, that's a godly thing, not an unholy thing.
Yeah, for sure.
It's amazing how we've missed out on some of these things over the years in the church in particular. And again, Jesus wept on the shorter verses in the Bible. But wow, what can we learn from him?
Yeah. I wonder if there's almost like a Puritan influence on that. Like it's just been a part of our, particularly American Western tradition for hundreds of years that, stuff it down and pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So you wonder how many of those are just cultural influences and not biblical ones.
Yeah.
Don't let them see you cry.
Yeah.
Because you're not a man. Real men don't cry.
Yeah, that's in First Hesitations in the Bible, isn't that right?
At least today on the podcast, no men will be crying.
That's
How about
right.
that?
Oh, we'll see.
We still have one more point. Maybe we.
If there's one of us who's going to cry, it'll be me.
Well, so our last point is physical development,
Yeah.
which could drive you to tears depending on what it is you're doing. So you might be able to mix emotional and physical, but and this is another, I think, really interesting insight that you've brought to the leadership development discussion, Aubrey, and that is being physically able, I mean, being healthy and fit, because a fit body helps to have a fit mind. And we know, are a huge fan of physical fitness. And
Yes, I'm a weightlifter.
Keeping it up. Well, you just told me before we went on air, you're probably going to go work out after this.
Yeah.
Because it's just, that's become a habit in your life. Yeah. So.
Yeah. But I've seen a number of articles that have just come out about the importance of this in regard to our brain, for example, the aging brain. And they talk about diet and exercise are two keys there in terms of Alzheimer's and all of this stuff. And I thought that was interesting that these are keys to our health, our actual physical health. Now, we can't lead a ministry for God if we're sick all the time. And you've probably seen some people in churches that are like that. There's always something wrong. They're always coming up sick with something, coming up with that as an excuse. And here I can get into trouble, but I've noticed that a number of men in particular in ministry have problems here in the physical side. And I'm thinking of weight. And if I'm stepping on toes, I'm going to just have to step on toes. But, I've seen a number of men in ministry who need to lose weight, who are not paying attention to health, the healthy side of their body and how they're doing. And this is simple things like having a checkup, having the physician look at us, running tests, and how are we doing in these areas, and where are we not doing, and where are we doing, and what can we do to change this? And also, how does this affect people under our ministry when we overeat, when we eat too much? And it sure shows up, and I think that people look down on that to a great degree.
It could happen for sure. I mean, that discipline, the discipline of health, it's just an important aspect for humans. So, yeah.
It's such an interesting point too, and I think that I don't want to discredit that there might be some theological aspect to this, in the sense that we, as Christians, we place a high degree on God's sovereignty, right? So this feeling like, well, I'm not going to die until it's my time, as if that's a license then to just eat and do whatever, or a sense that, the body is the flesh is bad, and like we're trying to escape the flesh, and go to our spiritual home. And so it's almost a twisting of theology in a way that's unhealthy. And certainly not in alignment with a true biblical theology when we think about Paul talking about how our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. And, our ultimate hope is not in this body-less eternity, but one with a new body. And so God is certainly not anti-bodies. Jesus himself has a renewed physical form. So, I think that there's maybe a little bit of bad theology sometimes in the church that causes pastors to not lean in the way that they should. And also the stress of ministry and the pace of ministry and all of that. Some people handle that poorly, and they abuse their bodies through overeating as a way to cope with going back to the emotions, going back to the emotional stress of the job. It's an addiction or a coping mechanism for feeling better.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to step on anyone's toes. If there's anything that I would be guilty of, it's, I'm working on it, but that's not something that naturally is easy for me. And so
we were stepping on toes on that last. No wonder you got us away from that quickly.
Scott's been doing good on his bike.
Yeah.
Got the
Had a harder time over the summer, right? But school's about to start, and be more consistent when the kids are back in school. But yeah, it's something I've been trying to take seriously because it's important. So it's okay to step on toes. If toes need to be stepped on, it's my own.
I am probably the least, and my wife would say this, I'm probably the least active out of the three of us here today. I mean, over my left shoulder is the stairs that Aubrey walks every day up and down to his office at Casa Malfers. So yeah, you're on it.
I haven't fallen yet, though.
Please don't.
Please don't fall. Please don't fall.
Worries about me falling down the stairs. It's possible.
AJ just he's blessed with an incredible metabolism. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see AJ looks very svelte and fit, but he just has God blessed him with a great metabolism.
Aubrey's looking pretty fit over here too.
Well, that's true, but he works at it. That's what I'm saying. My point is he works at it. You don't.
I don't do anything.
Yeah. I work at it and I don't look like either of you guys. So there you go.
Well, this was let's just recap. So we had our 5 elements of healthy leadership, and we started with character. We talked about knowledge and skills and emotions and physical health as well. I think this is a great list, Aubrey. Thanks for putting it together in previous books and then for us today to talk about.
My pleasure.
Well, this was a great chat, and I'm glad we got the opportunity to do it. Come over here and hang out with you for a little bit. I had to bribe him with lunch, but that's okay. That's usually how we end up meeting. But it's really been a pleasure to have you on with us, Aubrey, after 100 and after 99 episodes, and now for our 100th episode to have you on. It's a special treat for us and our listeners.
Yeah. Great. A treat for me too.
Well, thanks.
Did you say you're taking me out to dinner?
I will.
I'm sad that I'm 1,000 miles away and can't sit on that one.
Too bad you're not here.
Well, thanks so much, Ab. I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the podcast with us today.
My pleasure.
Wow, AJ, that was really great to chat with Aubrey for, I think it was about 30 minutes. We probably could have gone for much longer than that with him. So glad he was generous with his time to share with us and with all of our listeners today. We hope that you enjoyed hearing from Aubrey. And on the topic of Aubrey, we have a giveaway that's rhymes, I guess, with the theme of this episode. So why don't you share a little bit about that, AJ?
Yeah. So, kind of 2 things. Again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're celebrating 100 episodes, but we're also celebrating Aubrey's body of work as a teacher and a writer, and everything that he's brought to the church. So he retired from Dallas Seminary at the end of 2019. And we had wanted to do kind of a big thing, a celebration in 2020, but we got a little sidetracked with
there was like this pandemic. I don't know.
Pandemic thing. So, we're nearing maybe some more normalcy now. And so it was just a great time that we could bring all this together. So to celebrate Aubrey teaching 41 years as a teacher of church leaders, that's pretty remarkable. And so
yeah, and actually he had a recently, Dallas Theological Seminary, he would not want us to toot his horn this way, just so you know, which is why we're recording this with him not in the room anymore. But they named, I think, have named a new award, a leadership award. Yeah, in his honor, the Aubrey Malfers Leadership Award there at Dallas Theological Seminary. And I know that I think that was meant a lot to him, means a lot to us, just to recognize his body of work. But okay, so we've got this giveaway to celebrate these episodes and his career and all of that. So
that's right. Yeah. So what we're doing is giving away a copy of his best-selling book, Advanced Strategic Planning. This is used as curriculum in seminaries all over the country and has led lots of leaders through revitalizing their churches. It's the foundation of the work that we do still today. And it really is great content for turning your church around. And we're giving away 1 copy for every year that Aubrey spent teaching, 41 copies of Advanced Strategic Planning. And with a little treat inside the cover, that you'll notice when you crack open your copy if you're a winner. And here's what you have to do to become one.
Yes. And that surprise, by the way, is that these are signed by Aubrey. I don't want someone to think there's $100 bill in there. The surprise is he signed them. So we're giving away 40. I just really, I just wanted to get the expectations in the right spot.
Let the surprise just hang out there, Scott. Yeah, dude.
Well, I just didn't want to. I mean, I as much as I think people will be glad to have a signed copy, I don't want them thinking there's a golden ticket inside one of these suckers.
Hand delivered by an Oompa Loompa for the adventure of a lifetime.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so we're giving away 41 signed copies of this wonderful book, Advanced Strategic Planning. And here's what you got to do to enter. It's very simple. There are actually 2 ways to enter. Option number 1, after listening to today's episode, you can share one insight from the interview with Aubrey that you really liked. Let us know that in an email. So you just send an email to leadership@malfersgroup.com. Either if you're on our email list, just reply to the email we sent with these instructions. Or if you're listening to this and you're not part of our email list, send it to leadership@malfersgroup.com, put giveaway in the subject line, and then share with us something from the interview that meant something was meaningful to you. And that way we have a record of your entry, and that gives you 1 entry. The second way to enter is to share a quote from Aubrey or a memory if you had Aubrey as a student,
as a teacher,
anything like that as a teacher. Yeah, if you were a student, he was your teacher. If you have a memory or a story, or if you have a favorite quote from one of his books sitting on your shelf, share that quote online or that story online and tag the Malfers Group at the Malfers Group on Facebook. And that gives you 2 entries into the giveaway. So there's 2 ways, but you have to tag us so we know that you said something about Aubrey. Otherwise, we won't know. So we get a little notification on Facebook if you've tagged the Malfers Group. So let me say that again, hopefully clearly. You can, for 1 entry, send an email to leadership@malfersgroup.com with, what about this episode did you like that was meaningful to you? And that will give us an entry for you, 1 entry. Number 2, for 2 entries, if you go online, share a story, anecdote, quote, anything like that from Aubrey, and you tag the Malfers Group, so we get that notification, that will get you 2 entries into the giveaway. And we have 41 copies to give away, AJ. So people have a really good shot at winning one of these things.
Yeah.
So hop on the internet and send us an email. Hop online, tag the Malfers Group, share a quote or a story, and get you one of these copies. We would appreciate that.
There you go. And we'll still, as usual, we'll have a couple of discussion questions out in the description on YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube already, click in the description below, and you'll get a few discussion questions for your team to have this week. And if you are listening, well, thank you for the old school listen.
Yes, and go to malfersgroup.com/100 to read today's show notes. And thank you so much. If you're watching online, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell and all the things that help you know when a new episode has posted. We love and appreciate you guys. We're looking forward to the next 100. AJ reminded me that when we hit 500 episodes, that means we will have been doing this for 10 years. Will we still be doing this? I don't know. But I hope so. So as long as you keep listening, we'll keep doing it. Thanks, guys, so much. We love you. We'll see you at episode 101.
Bye.